The umbrella lay abandoned on the sidewalk, its bright colors stark against the gray Indiana pavement. 8-year-old April Tinsley had been carrying it just moments before, walking to a friend's house on that Good Friday afternoon in 1988. Now, it was the only sign she had been there. She was just going 3 blocks, her mother would later tell investigators, her voice breaking. 3 blocks in broad daylight. Fort Wayne, Indiana had always felt safe. Parents let their children walk to school, ride bikes until dark, play in the neighborhood without fear. But on April 1st, 1988, that illusion of safety shattered forever. A little girl with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile had simply disappeared without a trace, right off a quiet residential street, while other children played nearby. What followed would become one of the most haunting cases in Indiana's history. A perpetrator who wouldn't just take an innocent life, but would torment an entire community for decades. Anonymous messages that haunted families for years. Someone dangerous hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting, remembering. For 30 years, April's family would wonder who had taken their daughter. For 30 years, someone dangerous walked free among them. And when the truth finally emerged through a revolutionary new science, it would prove more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Subscribe now for more true crime investigations that changed history. This is the story of April Marie Tinsley and the groundbreaking investigation that would finally bring her case to justice. April Marie Tinsley was the kind of child who lit up every room she entered. At 8 years old, she had a contagious laugh, a collection of stuffed animals she treated like real pets, and a gap between her front teeth that showed whenever she smiled, which was often. She loved reading, especially Dr. Seuss books, and would spend hours drawing pictures of horses and rainbows in her notebooks. Fort Wayne in 1988 was the epitome of Midwest America. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and the kind of neighborhoods where everyone knew each other's names. The Tinsley family lived in a modest home on Hoagland Avenue, in a working-class area where children played freely and parents watched from front porches. April was a 3rd grader at Fairfield Elementary, just a few blocks away. That Good Friday was supposed to be special. School was out for Easter break, and April had spent the morning watching cartoons and helping her mother with spring cleaning. After lunch, she asked if she could visit her friend, who lived on West William Street, a walk she'd made dozens of times before. Her mother, Janet, saw no reason to worry. It was 1:30 in the afternoon, broad daylight, in a neighborhood where the biggest concern was usually kids riding bikes too fast. April put on her favorite jacket, purple with pink trim, and grabbed her umbrella, even though the skies were clear. She liked carrying it, twirling it as she walked. Janet watched from the window as her daughter headed down the street, blonde hair bouncing with each step. It was a sight she would replay in her mind for the next 30 years, wondering if there was something, anything, she could have done differently. The last confirmed sighting of April Tinsley came at 1:45 p.m. A neighbor saw her walking past Hoagland Elementary School, still twirling that colorful umbrella, humming to herself. She was just 1 block from her destination, from safety, from what should have been an ordinary Friday afternoon with a friend. But April never made it to West William Street. At 2:30 p.m., when April hadn't arrived, her friend's mother called the Tinsley home. Janet felt the first flutter of concern but tried to stay calm. Maybe April had stopped to pet a dog or gotten distracted by something. She grabbed her car keys and drove the 3-block route, expecting to find her daughter dawdling somewhere along the way. The umbrella was the first thing she saw. It lay on the sidewalk near Hoagland and Lexington, abandoned at an odd angle, as if dropped suddenly. Janet's heart began to race. She picked it up with trembling hands, calling April's name. No answer. She knocked on doors, asked everyone she saw. No one had seen her daughter after she passed the school. By 3 p.m., Fort Wayne police were searching the neighborhood. By nightfall, the FBI had joined the investigation. The entire community mobilized. Hundreds of volunteers combing through yards, alleys, abandoned buildings. They called her name until their voices went hoarse. They searched until their flashlight batteries died. They prayed for a miracle that wouldn't come. For 3 agonizing days, the Tinsleys waited by their phone. Every ring might be news that April had been found safe. Every knock at the door might bring their baby home. Janet couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely breathe. She kept April's bed made, her stuffed animals arranged just the way she liked them, as if preparing for her return. On April 4th, the waiting ended in the worst possible way. A jogger running along Ruffner Road in DeKalb County, about 20 miles northeast of Fort Wayne, noticed something in a ditch beside a cornfield. At first, he thought it was discarded clothing. Then, he saw the purple jacket with pink trim. April had been found in a remote location, far from home. The medical examiner would later determine she had endured something terrible and had passed away from lack of oxygen. She had been gone for approximately 48 hours, meaning someone had kept her for at least a day after taking her. The location revealed crucial evidence. Whoever was responsible had been careless, or perhaps confident they'd never be caught. Investigators recovered DNA evidence, revolutionary technology in 1988 that would prove invaluable decades later. They found fibers, shoe prints in the mud, and something else that concerned even veteran detectives. The scene suggested someone who had taken time and care, even in this final act. The cornfield was isolated, accessible only by a rural road that few people traveled. Whoever brought April here knew the area well, had likely scouted it beforehand. This wasn't a random act that had gone wrong. This was planned, methodical, calculated in its execution. As news of April's discovery spread through Fort Wayne, the community's grief transformed into terror. Someone dangerous was among them, someone who could take a little girl in broad daylight from a busy neighborhood without anyone seeing anything suspicious. Parents who had let their children walk to school now drove them to the front door. Kids who had played outside until dark were called in before sunset. The innocence of an entire city had been shattered, along with one family's world. At April's funeral, over 1,000 people came to pay their respects. Her small white casket was covered in pink roses, her favorite color. Her classmates from Fairfield Elementary sang "Jesus Loves Me" through their tears. Janet Tinsley stood at the graveside, clutching the umbrella her daughter had carried on that last walk, and made a promise. "We will find who did this to you, baby, no matter how long it takes." She had no idea it would take 30 years to keep that promise. Comment below if you remember when this case first made headlines, and don't forget to like this video as we dive deeper into one of the most complex investigations in criminal history. The Fort Wayne Police Department had never handled a case quite like April Tinsley's disappearance. Within hours of discovering her, they established a task force that would eventually grow to include the FBI, Indiana State Police, and dozens of local officers. Detective Dan Abbott, a veteran investigator with 15 years on the force, would later describe it as the case that haunted every cop in Indiana. Phase 1 began with the immediate canvass of April's neighborhood. Detectives knocked on every door within a 10-block radius, interviewing over 500 residents in the first week alone. They were looking for anything unusual: a strange car, an unfamiliar face, someone acting nervously. Several witnesses remembered seeing a blue pickup truck circling the area that afternoon, but descriptions varied wildly. Was it dark blue or light, old or new? No one could agree. The evidence collected from the scene represented cutting-edge forensic science for 1988. DNA had only been used in criminal cases for 2 years, and many smaller labs didn't even have the capability to process it. Fort Wayne sent samples to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, where technicians successfully developed a DNA profile of the perpetrator. They had his genetic fingerprint, but no suspect to match it against. Investigators pursued every lead with obsessive determination. They interviewed known offenders within a 100-mile radius, collecting DNA samples from anyone who couldn't provide an alibi. They investigated April's family, teachers, neighbors, standard procedure that yielded nothing but heartbreak. They even consulted psychics, following up on visions and dreams reported by dozens of people, claiming to know where the perpetrator was hiding. By 1990, the case had generated over 10,000 tips and consumed thousands of man-hours, but investigators were no closer to identifying April's perpetrator. Then, on a May morning, a farmer discovered something that would reignite the investigation and terrify the community all over again. Scrawled on the side of a barn in block letters were the words, I took 8-year-old April. M. Tinsley. Did you find her other shoe? Haha, I will act again. The message had been written in crayon, a child's tool, used for an adult's disturbing purpose. Forensic analysis of the handwriting suggested someone with limited education, possibly left-handed, definitely troubled. The psychological profile that emerged painted a chilling picture. This was someone who didn't just commit this act. He reveled in the aftermath, in the fear he had created. He was likely local, familiar with both Fort Wayne and the rural areas where April had been found. He probably followed news coverage obsessively, might even have attended vigils or searches. Most disturbing of all, his message suggested he'd kept something as a reminder, and he was threatening to act again. For the next 14 years, investigators chased shadows. They received hundreds of false confessions, investigated countless suspicious individuals, and followed leads that went nowhere. The blue pickup truck was never found. The perpetrator's DNA matched no one in their expanding database. April's other shoe, mentioned in the barn message, was never recovered. Then, in May 2004, the perpetrator resurfaced in the most terrifying way possible. 4 young girls in Fort Wayne reported finding disturbing items left at their homes, used personal items placed in plastic bags along with typewritten notes. The notes were specific, personal, and horrifying. Hi, honey. I've been watching you. I am the same person that took April Tinsley. Each note described details about the girls' routines, proving the perpetrator had been observing them. The DNA from the items matched April's perpetrator perfectly. After 14 years of silence, he was targeting children again. The 2004 incidents transformed the investigation. Criminal profilers from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created a more detailed portrait. A white male, likely 40-50 years old, living alone or with elderly relatives, employed in a job that allowed him to observe children without suspicion. He was organized, patient, and growing bolder. The fact that he'd kept DNA evidence for 16 years suggested both arrogance and compulsion. Police installed surveillance cameras near the victims' homes, increased patrols, and held community meetings to warn parents. They collected DNA from hundreds more suspects, ran the perpetrator's profile through every database available, and even appeared on national crime shows hoping for a breakthrough. Nothing worked. The perpetrator went silent again, vanishing as completely as he had in 1988. By 2015, Detective Abbott had retired, but he couldn't let April's case go. He consulted on it voluntarily, keeping in touch with new investigators, following every development in forensic technology. Some cases you solve, he would say. Others solve you. April Tinsley solved me the day we found her. So far, police had one of the most complete DNA profiles in criminal history, handwriting samples, and proof the perpetrator was still alive and active. Yet after nearly 3 decades, they had no name, no face, and no justice for April Tinsley. In 2018, a revolutionary breakthrough in forensic science changed everything. Genetic genealogy, the same technology people used to find long-lost relatives, had just helped California investigators identify the Golden State perpetrator after 40 years. Detective Brett Thomas, who had inherited April's case, wondered if the same technique could finally unmask April's perpetrator. The process was unlike anything attempted in Indiana before. Investigators uploaded the perpetrator's DNA profile to GED Match, a public genealogy database where users voluntarily shared genetic information to build family trees. Within days, they had matches, distant cousins of the perpetrator, who had no idea their family tree harbored such darkness. Genetic genealogist C.C. Moore worked with investigators to build an elaborate family tree spanning 5 generations. Starting with the distant matches, she worked backwards and forwards, mapping out bloodlines, marriages, births, and deaths. It was meticulous work, requiring thousands of hours of research into public records, obituaries, and census data. The tree gradually narrowed. The perpetrator had to be male, likely born between 1955 and 1965, with ancestors from specific regions of Ohio and Indiana. Cross-referencing with criminal profiling data, investigators identified 12 possible suspects, then 6, then 3. Then one name emerged that made investigators' blood run cold: John D. Miller. Miller lived in Grabille, Indiana, just 15 miles from Fort Wayne. He was 59 years old, worked at a local RV manufacturing plant, and lived alone in a trailer. He had no criminal record, had never been on their radar, never provided DNA, despite being interviewed briefly in 1988 as part of the neighborhood canvass. He'd been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. On July 14, 2018, surveillance teams watched Miller leave for work. As soon as his truck disappeared, investigators moved in. They collected trash from his property, used items, cigarette butts, anything that might contain DNA. Within 24 hours, the Indiana State Police Laboratory had confirmation John D. Miller was April Tinsley's perpetrator. The arrest team moved at dawn on July 15th. Miller was getting ready for work when police surrounded his trailer. Detective Thomas would later describe the moment. He opened the door, saw us, and his shoulders just dropped. He knew why we were there. What came next shocked even seasoned investigators. Miller didn't deny it. He didn't ask for a lawyer. Instead, he said 5 words that had taken 30 years to hear. I knew this day would come. Inside the Fort Wayne Police Department interview room, John D. Miller sat across from detectives and began confessing to actions that had haunted Indiana for 3 decades. His voice was flat, emotionless, as if describing someone else's behavior. He remembered every detail with chilling clarity. Miller explained how he'd been driving through April's neighborhood that Good Friday, looking for an opportunity. When he saw her walking alone with her umbrella, he made a split-second decision that would destroy countless lives. He offered her a ride, claiming he was looking for his lost dog. April, trusting and innocent, got in his truck. The confession revealed the banality of evil. Miller wasn't a criminal mastermind or a sophisticated predator. He was a factory worker with disturbing thoughts who acted on them once and spent 30 years both fearing and hoping he'd be caught. He admitted to writing the barn message, to leaving the notes in 2004, to driving past the Tinsley home hundreds of times over the years. "Why didn't you turn yourself in?" Detective Thomas asked. "I couldn't," Miller replied, "but I couldn't forget either." The DNA evidence was overwhelming. Miller's genetic profile matched not only the original crime scene, but also the 2004 evidence. Forensic genealogy had done what 3 decades of traditional investigation couldn't. It had given April's case a name and a face. On December 7th, 2018, Miller stood before Judge Fran Gull in Allen County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed with investigators who'd worked the case, community members who'd searched for April, and most importantly, the Tinsley family who'd waited 30 years for this moment. Miller pleaded guilty to the charges against him. As part of the plea agreement, he would serve 80 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for the 59-year-old. There would be no trial, no appeals, no chance of him ever walking free again. Janet Tinsley, April's mother, finally got to face her daughter's perpetrator. In her victim impact statement, she spoke directly to Miller. "For 30 years, you have lived free. You watched my family suffer. You knew what you took from us." Her voice broke, but she continued. "April was my baby. She was 8 years old. 8 years old." Judge Gull's final words echoed through the courtroom. "John Miller, you will die in prison, and even that is more mercy than you showed April Tinsley." The conviction of John D. Miller sent shockwaves through Fort Wayne. For 30 years, parents had wondered if April's perpetrator was their neighbor, their co-worker, someone they passed at the grocery store. Learning it was Miller, a man who'd lived quietly among them, who'd worked regular jobs and attended community events, left many grappling with how evil can hide behind such an ordinary face. April's case transformed criminal investigations nationwide. It became a landmark example of how genetic genealogy could solve cold cases, inspiring police departments across America to revisit unsolved cases with new hope. Within a year of Miller's arrest, the same technology helped solve dozens of other cold cases, bringing closure to families who'd waited decades for answers. 30 years. That's how long April Tinsley's perpetrator walked free. 30 years of birthday candles she never blew out, Christmases she never celebrated, dreams she never got to chase. But perhaps the most chilling lesson from April Tinsley's story is this: Dangerous people don't always look dangerous. John Miller was nobody special. He wasn't remarkably intelligent or particularly careful. He was just a man with a terrible secret who got lucky for 30 years. Some say justice was finally served when Miller was sentenced to die in prison. Others say 30 years of freedom was 30 years too many. But one thing remains certain: April. Tinsley's legacy lives on in every cold case, solved through genetic genealogy, in every child who makes it home safely, in every parent who holds their baby a little tighter. Subscribe now for more true crime cases that revolutionized justice, and watch our next video on how genetic genealogy is solving America's coldest cases.